if you want to start making chatbots, AI agents, stuff like that for your business, keep watching, because I'm going to be going through all the sort of basics and everything you need to know to actually get started making these sort of really functional chatbots for your websites. WhatsApp, Instagram, answer DMs, lead magnets, stuff like that, all in Botpress. So I'm going to be giving you sort of a basic rundown of all the features that you actually really need to make some really cool bots. And yeah. So once you're in the Botpress actual scenario builder, you're gonna see something like this. So it's gonna have a start and an end. That's basically just where you can build in between these two nodes and create sort of chatbots, AI agents, stuff like that, stuff of that nature. So I'll show you all the things that I think are really important when building chatbots, agents, stuff like that. I will do a part 2 perhaps with some more sort of advanced stuff, but this is just going to be quite a bare bones one where I can just teach you everything that you really need to know, and then leave out all the sort of stuff that isn't exactly needed, or not needed often at least. So first, how it works is you have nodes and you have cards, and that's basically how you set everything up. So nodes is just basically a block where you can attach as many cards, and cards are like sort of functions. Done that wrong there, but yeah, so you can have as many sort of cards and actions as you want in these nodes, and you just start filling it up with different things, and you can move it to the next node, and it just keeps on going like that. So I'll show you the cards that I think are definitely needed. So the send messages, this is obviously going to be important. Text, this is just going to send the user a text. So the most obvious way I can talk about this is just like a sort of entry card. So say it's something like, hey, welcome back to whatever chatbot, something like that. And then when this chatbot is engaged with, it's just going to send this message straight to the user. So whatever you have there. So that's really important, because you usually want to greet the user, for instance. The rest of this is all the same, but it's just different mediums. So an image is just going to send the user an image. Audio, video. I don't really use any of these. The only one I actually use is card. This is really good because it's good for business sort of terms. So like a landing page, for example. Because what you can do is you can have a title, an image, and the best part is an action button. So, for example, you'd be like, click here to give us a review. Then you'd attach like a logo of your business, and then an action button. You can put a link here to fill in a form, or to go to your lead magnet, or you know what I mean, any sort of call to action here. You can just put it in here, and then they click on the logo or click on a little link, and it sends them straight to an external sort of website or landing page. So this is really good for business sort of stuff. So you can combine titles, images, and actions in one sort of card. So I'd say the only ones I really use is text and card, and sometimes image. That's all the sort of send messages cards. Execute, I'll get to that in a bit. That's really important, but I'll talk about that later. Records, I might talk about that in another video. It's not really needed for completing like bare bones sort of agents and chatbots, but it can be useful in some circumstances, so I will talk about that probably in another video. All of this I don't really use at all, to be honest. The only ones I use HTTP request a little bit, but I'll get to that as well later. Flow logic, so this is probably the most important, or one of the most important topics to use. So expression is what you're going to be using probably the most, and it's basically how you can add conditions to your flow. So when I say conditions, I mean like kind of like a filter. So basically whatever the user, if a user enters something, so you're gonna need these capture information cards. So I'll do an example. If let's say enter a number between 1 and 2, and then you want to store this as, let's say, number. So what's going to happen here is we're going to have 2 expressions, and you'll see what I mean when I do this. Basically, when whatever number they enter, so let's say they enter 1 or they enter 2, it's going to send them to different text cards. This is something that's you're gonna be using a lot when you're making chatbots and stuff like that, because you need to have some sort of logic. So there you go, entered 1 and then entered 2. So you want to change this condition to something like workflow dot number equals and then 2, and then you want to do the exact same thing but with the 1, but change the number. So you do 1 like that, and then what's going to happen is I'll add a little card at the front, so it's like, hey, welcome to my bot. There we go. And then now if I start an emulation, enter a number between 1 and 2, entered 1, and then if I entered 2, it would have done 2. A key thing to note here is I've done like the sort of quotations here because it's a string. So this got saved as, see how it's got a T? It got saved as a string variable. Sometimes you're gonna save stuff as integers, and then sometimes you got Boolean as well. That's not really gonna be as common, but depending on your sort of capture information, some variables are gonna be different. So, for example, if it was a number and not a quotation, you would just do something like that. You just get rid of the quotations, but because it's a string, you need to have these. Anyways, moving on from expressions, that's basically how you give any sort of logic. So you've already probably learned half of the important things you need to learn, to be honest. It's actually not too difficult. These sort of raw inputs is probably the most important thing, because you're going to be common for businesses who want to use these. The most common thing is going to be stuff like a Q&A bot that answers questions about a business. So a chatbot basically. So you're going to say stuff like, what would you like to know? And then it's going to search a knowledge base, which I'll get to as well. And then it's going to find an answer to that question, whatever they say, basically. So the knowledge bases, I might just jump into that now. What that is basically, you want to, if you're making a chatbot where it's like a sort of feedback or like a Q&A bot that's going to be sitting on your website or sitting on your like WhatsApp or Instagram or something that's answering questions about your business, you're going to need a knowledge base. So this is basically where you upload a website URL, like a PDF, about basically just everything in your business. So like, let's say you're like a football coach. You upload your website URL into this. You can add knowledge bases here. I've got a couple here. I've got barbers, color detailing. I was using them before for other projects, but you want to add your website URL in here, and then Botpress is going to learn all of the information in that URL or your PDF. So you just click document if you're doing a PDF, or website if you're doing your website, and then you just hit that. You put your URL in there, and then it will learn it. And then now what will happen is you can add a sort of knowledge base here, and it's going to find an answer to that question. So let's say, what would you like to know? And you save it as user question. And then now you can add a knowledge base. So the knowledge base you have for your website or whatever. And then what's going to happen is that question is going to be sort of sent with AI sent into that knowledge base, and AI is going to fetch a relevant answer if it can find an answer. Sometimes it's not going to be able to find an answer, and then you're going to get an error. You can set up sort of error handling, or you can set up a sort of thing where it just repeats this same node until you get an answer. So it's going to say like saying, sorry, I didn't understand, you want to ask this question again? You hit yes, and then it's just going to repeat the scenario. So that's probably the most important part. Yeah, that's basically half of what it is. Trying to think what else would be important. These are going to be important as well. So single choice, multiple choice. This is like just another way to get inputs. So all these sort of input things are kind of the exact same. It's just different ways of how they get information. So I use these quite a lot. This is where you have like a sort of menu, and it'll be like, what would you like to do? And then you can have like, ask a question, leave a review, book a session, stuff like that. And then whatever the user clicks, it can send them to a different node, different sort of flow based on what they said. So let's say if they said ask a question, it's gonna say what was your question in a raw input, and then as I said before, it's gonna look at your knowledge base and then give you an answer. So that's an example. Leave a review. You might have, as I said before, like a card that sends them with an action button to your Google form. And then book a session. You're gonna have most likely raw inputs like, what's your email? Oh, sorry, that's the wrong card. You might have something like, what's your email? Now you have their email. That's really important, obviously, for lead capture. You might have, not quantity. Something like, when do you want to book? Something like that. You want to save all these variables. You need to make sure you save these, because you're going to need these when you send it to your CRM or whatever. So you're going to need these as saved variables. And then you're eventually going to ask a bunch of these questions. And then once you have all these sort of variables about booking a session in, you're going to use an execute card. So this is where you send data to somewhere else. So variables that you've gathered from your user, you want to be able to send them to something. So I use make.com for my sort of automations, and that's where I can connect Botpress with a webhook. I've done videos sort of on this on my channel, which you can watch. But basically what happens is you create a webhook on make.com, and it triggers when this execute card triggers, basically. So it's just how you send data. So you don't have to use make.com, you can use N8N, whatever. But what you do is you just say, create a webhook to make.com. You can write this code yourself, obviously, but I'm assuming you guys don't know how to write it. So I'm just gonna show you. Yeah, it gives you a sort of AI feature. And send variables X, Y, Z. And you just put the variables that you want to send to make.com, and then it's gonna create a webhook. I'll show you what it looks like. Obviously those aren't real variables, so it's not really gonna work, but yeah, it'll be like something like this. And then you want to replace this with whatever your make.com webhook is. Yeah, I'm not going to be going into how to connect to make.com. That's a separate video. I've talked about it already on my channel, I think, as well. I'm sure it's the same for like N8N or any of those automation, Zapier or anything. But yeah, you want to just replace that with your URL for your webhook, and then basically you can send variables to other platforms, which is basically what's the most useful in this platform, because this is sort of the best way to interact with leads early, use them as lead magnets, stuff like that, get reviews, get all this data really easily, and then just send it to CRMs, send it to databases, and stuff like that. So I'll start off with, this is a sort of Q&A flow. So you have your main sort of flow here. And then what I do is, because it gets really messy if you have too many of these sort of nodes everywhere. So what you can do is you can create a node, and then you can create a flow within a card. Well, how you do that is you create a workflow, and that just creates a new sort of scenario. And then what you can do with that is go into your main, and then you can add it as a card. So it's going to be that one, the one that I just made. And then now everything that happens in that node is in a whole entire new flow. So that's going to save a lot of space, and I recommend doing that because it makes it a lot more easy and simple to actually read what's going on. But yeah, that's another little tip, but it's not really important. But yeah, I'll go to FAQ. So this is where you can do question answer. This is how I set it up. So you want to have a text card, something that greets them. Hey, I'd love to assist you. Ask me a question, or press exit to return to the main menu. So you want to add a choice. So this can be done on any sort of captured information. You just want to come to choice tab, and then click plus, and then write exit. You don't have to do this. I just did it because it lets them opt out, sort of. Otherwise, they'll be, stuck in this sort of flow. And then next, I didn't talk about this before, but this is really important, obviously. You need to do @question, because that's what my variable was. So I just did workflow.question. You don't have to write workflow. You just write question, and then workflow it just always has workflow at the start. So it's workflow dot, and then whatever your variable you entered was, saves as a string, obviously, because it's text. And then, yeah, you want to come here, you want to your variable, so just @question. And then this is obviously important, include knowledge base. And then I've got Elite Football. So this is a client that I was working with before, football coaching sort of business. And I had a whole PDF of all the information about his business. So stuff like where it's located, what's the coach's name, stuff, just important stuff that someone would ask. You have it all in a PDF, and then you want to include that in the knowledge base. And then, as I said before, we've got expressions. So this is where it gets a bit complicated, because this is not really what I explained before, but you want to have turn.knowledge agent answer length is more than 0. So this is basically all this is saying is, does your knowledge answer say an answer that's more than 0 characters, which basically means it replied. That's all it's saying, really. It looks a bit confusing, but it's just saying that the answer was longer than 0. So if it actually was 0, so true, it's going to come down here and say, sorry, I didn't understand. If it's not true, which is what you want, it's going to come up here, and then it's going to say turn knowledge agent answer, sorry. And then that you want to have that as a text. So this is basically just triggering the bot to actually print what the answer was to that question, because otherwise it will answer the question, but it will never actually say it to the user. It will just store it. You need to have a text, and you need to have a sort of text card that actually prints the question. So you just want to copy exactly what I wrote here. So you've got 2 curly brackets, and then exactly what I said there. And then that's just going to actually print what was said. And then what I have here is a second sort of base, which if you tell, it looks exactly the same. This is basically where ask me another question or press exit to return to the main menu. So it basically just basically loops the entire scenario. So they can just keep on answering more and more questions, and then they just opt out with exit whenever they want. This is not the only way to do this, by the way, but I'm just explaining how I usually do it whenever I set up a bot. And then if it's sorry, I don't understand. So let's say the question wasn't in the knowledge base, or it's too complex, whatever. It's going to say, sorry, I didn't understand, and it's going to send them back to this same flow. So it's just going to they can just repeat the question in different terms until the AI actually understands what's saying. That's really important that you have a second follow-up node and you don't just have one, because people often want to ask more than one question. So these are all the exact same as well, these expressions. You can just copy exactly what I've done here. But yeah, this is how I set up basically every Q&A in any of my agents that I make. So yeah. So one last sort of thing I'm going to show you is a Google review sort of flow. I was going to jump into like a flow where you can book a session in, but I think it's a bit too much for this video. I might do that in part 2. That's a bit more difficult because you have to work with a lot of execute codes and stuff like that. But this is basically the best possible way to sort of teach the basics of Botpress. How I do feedback is, it is a really effective way because it sort of alleviates negative reviews, especially on Google. So how it works is, again, you're gonna have a text thing. This is gonna be coming off your main, by the way. So it's gonna be like someone clicks for feedback and it sends them to this flow, if that wasn't already obvious. But yeah, we would love to hear your feedback. And then you want to have a raw input, and you want to have this as a number. You don't want to have it as a raw. You don't want to have this as a raw input. Notice how the other ones were all raw strings. This one's actually a number. So from 1 to 5, rate your overall experience with auto charm detailing. This was another client, detailing business, and you want to save their answer, so whatever number they put, as workflow.rating, and you need to make sure it's a number, not a string. Now we come to the expressions. If it was a bad review, you want to have something like this. So workflow.rating was less than 5. So that's not even that bad, but we only want to be sending people who give it 5 out of 5 to our Google review. So this is really important to keep your reputation and sort of improve your reputation as well. So if it was a bad rating, so let's say anything from 4 below, it's going to send them up here, and this is where we would love for you to fill out this feedback form to see what we can improve to make your experience better. And then it's a card, and it's got their football academy, Google form, and then it's got the logo, and then as I said before, it's got an action button, and takes them to a Google form. Then they fill out the form, tell them what's good, and then you get some feedback, and there was no bad review given. So this is really good because A, you're going to improve, and B, you don't have any negative feedback on your site. So yeah. And then you want to have something like this. Click below to return the main menu, and you want to add a choice. Click here. When they click here, exit, takes them back to main menu. Done. And then if they give you a good rating, you can probably guess what's going to happen. We are so glad you've enjoyed your experience thus far. We would greatly appreciate your feedback on Google. And then it's going to give them the same sort of logo. You can obviously make this different. And then review, and then they can click this Google review. And then again, click below to return the main menu. Done. So I'm going to quickly show you what this actually would look like. So, welcome to Spear Football. What brought you today? Let's say feedback. We'd love to hear feedback. So I'm going to do 4 to show you first. We'd love for you to fill out this feedback form. Then click here. Takes you to a Google form. Alright, now we'll go back to the main menu, and then I'll do it again, but this time I'll say 5. We're so glad you have enjoyed your experience thus far. We'll greatly appreciate your feedback on Google, and then now it's going to take them to a Google review instead of Google form. Basically, that's how it works. So I hope you learned something new about building agents and chatbots. If you want a part 2 where I go more in depth onto some more difficult stuff like booking sessions, execute codes, all that sort of stuff, I'll do another video where I can sort of go more in depth. There's more just the basics and everything you need to know to actually get started and get your foot in the door. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed.